And thank you for having us. My name is Rebekkah Smith-Aldrich. I'm the Executive Director of a public library system in New York, and I am the co-founder and board president of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, which we're going to explain in a minute. And I'm joined here today by Nardia Cumberbatch, and I'll let Nardia introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I am Nardia Cumberbatch. I'm a librarian here in Florida. So sometimes environment might be a little bit different, and we'll talk about some things that will impact how we progress through this act.
So we understand you're looking for some practical strategies of thinking about sustainability in your libraries. And it sounded like the theme in what you were asking for was a lot about how to build buy-in and communicate both inside your organization and turning outward to your constituent communities about work you may be doing in this space. So that's what we've prepared today, but of course we'll leave plenty of time for questions and make sure we get exactly what you'd like while you're spending time with us here today. So first, we want to say thank you for being here. We are sustainability possibly evangelists and really enjoy talking to people about the topic and sharing our strategies and our experiences. Both Nardia's organization and mine are both certified under something called the Sustainable Library Certification Program. And that's part of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, which Nardia and I are both representing here today. You might be familiar with us or not, but we are a group of volunteers that are colleagues like you, just library professionals who a few years ago started noticing we just weren't really focused enough on the topic of sustainability and not really seeing anything top down coming to advise libraries on how to accelerate the work. So thanks to a group of folks in New York, myself and about 20 other people, we created the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, which has grown over the past 8 years to provide tools and resources to folks in the library profession to really think about the topic of sustainability. What does that word mean, which we're going to talk about today, and how to accelerate work in the face of climate change and what's happening in our natural world today. And a lot of what we've developed, I think, has been it extrapolates well regardless of what you're facing. So part of what we've done is try to design tools that work for any type of library, whether it be public, academic, or a school librarian. We've tried to scale it so it works for small, medium, or very large organizations. In the Sustainable Library Certification Program right now, we have very small libraries with a handful of staff all the way up to the San Diego County Public Library, serving over 6 million people with over 30 branches. So it scales pretty well. So on the left there, you see the Roadmap to Sustainability, which is a free resource. You can download it. It's a mobile app, or you can get the PDF version if you're like me, you like print stuff. And it's a place to kind of gather your thinking about the topic and start picking some steps for how to get moving on the topic of sustainability. The Sustainable Library Certification Program, we'll talk more about here this afternoon, is a methodology to accelerate the work in your organization using really what's been fine. It's been road tested now for several years. It helps organize your thinking and get you going and working on some very practical things that make a difference very quickly. And hopefully what ultimately it does is help to change the mindset in your organization to think about sustainability and climate change and all the work that needs to get done in a way that is a holistic mindset instead of a checklist, even though it's a checklist, which is ironic, but it has an outcome that's been very successful to the libraries who have gone through it in getting people focused, doing good work that matters, and stop just talking and actually doing work. So we can talk more about that towards the end of the presentation, but all of it has really been driven by the urgency that's necessary behind climate change. When we started the work 8 years ago, it was obviously something that was to some degree still controversial. We were still battling climate change denial and conservative communities where you really couldn't talk about climate change. And now we're looking here 8 years later at huge organizations, world leaders. Everyone is for the most part, on board now that work has to be done. We have to change how we're thinking. And in the briefing that was produced by the American Library Association last year, finally our Library Professional Association is out there now talking about the fact this is the grandest challenge of our generation. And it's a tough one because it has been slow moving for so long that it doesn't feel as acute as other things we are facing right now, like book challenges and other problems. But meanwhile, it is creating emergency situations throughout the world. So as we think about the UN Secretary General calling this a code red for humanity, it's a call to action. It's asking us to do things differently, to think differently. And it gets overwhelming when you start to think about all of the intersections of what has caused climate change, of what the outcomes of climate change are, how we're going to prepare our institutions, our library workers, and our communities, and being a good partner in our communities to help people build resilience and be prepared for what's happening, because it certainly is not getting any better out there since we have not done what we should have done to mitigate climate change. So I think we don't want people curling up in a ball and being paralyzed about the topic. We also don't want people just kind of scattershot working on all different things in all different corners without focus and science behind some of the choices that they're making. So we really, I'll say it, we pushed hard at the New York State level, and then we took it right up the chain to the American Library Association, and really excited to say that in 2019, ALA adopted sustainability as a core value, modeling the work we've been doing here through the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. And it's resulted in more cohesion, common vocabulary, more action on the topic, more resources given to the topic. And we're just seeing this groundswell of library folks working on it, talking about it, convening like you're doing here today, which is so exciting. And so at the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, we've just been really focused on creating a community of practice where we're not saying we have all the answers, but we're saying, darn it, we're going to try some stuff. We're going to see if it works. And if it doesn't, we'll iterate and we'll try again. But we can all learn from each other and really accelerate the work that needs to get done. So we're going to share today some of the ways that we've seen this working throughout the libraries that are working on the Sustainable Library Certification Program. There's over 100 libraries across the country and now in Canada working on the certification program. And we're just learning so much from everybody. So hopefully we can share some of that here today and accelerate your own thinking on the topic. I should have started at the beginning by mentioning I've had COVID the past few days, and so I'm doing my best with my voice, but I'm sorry if I have a coughing fit in the midst of this. It's only like my 8th presentation this week. So we talk about climate action a lot in our world, but we don't often define it. And so for today's presentation, we just wanted to lay out the way we think about it in the project. Climate action encompasses a very large body of actions. And what we might think of it as looks different from person to person and region to region geographically. But at the basics level, it has 3 major components. One being mitigation, which is very classic climate action. It's reducing reliance on fossil fuels, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So all those classic things of let's get off of gas-fueled cars and start using electric vehicles that are charged at charging stations that are powered by water power, hydropower, or solar. We're looking at buildings being less reliant on fossil fuels and using solar panels and geothermal. We're just like cutting down transportation, which is a massive area of emissions. So mitigation is that reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, which is what's fueling climate change and making everything worse and worse as the oceans heat and the storms get worse and the heat waves get longer. So that's the classic climate action. But unfortunately, at this point, climate change has wrought such damaging outcomes at this point, we have to admit we have to adapt in the face of what's already happening and what's predicted to happen because of climate change. And so this is where the adaptation comes in, that we need to build our community's resilience and understanding of how to function in ways that allow our society to continue in the face of very disruptive weather, rising sea level, climate change refugees, all of the stuff that's coming because we weren't able to get it under control. So these things have to happen concurrently, but it all has to happen through the lens of justice. And so that's where I think a lot of the powerful nature of libraries comes into this work, which is not only leading by example in the areas of mitigation and adaptation, but also helping bring more voices to the table, building understanding, respect, and empathy amongst neighbors so we can problem solve together and really build up the social fabric that protects people no matter what we're faced with, whether it's climate change fueled disasters, or as a friend of mine who works at New Jersey State Library says, there is a disaster every day in many communities for individuals and families. It's not just these massive disasters that are fueled by climate change. It's the everyday stuff that we need to help folks with too, which libraries are already doing and very well positioned to do. So combining all of these things together, showing libraries as true, authentic leaders on the topic topic of climate action in our communities and on our campuses and our schools, we think is a really smart way to, strategically position libraries as relevant and responsive, but it's just the work that needs to get done. So we've identified really 4 characteristics of what we call sustainable libraries. So we'll just briefly go over these for you and then go into some custom content that Nardia and I created for you today based on what Edward explained you were looking for. These are the broad strokes. These are the categories of work that we see for sustainable libraries moving forward. And it starts from within. It means that institutions like ours really need to be authentic, and we need to bolster ourselves. We have to be strong financially, strategically, thinking about the future, but also authentic in the fact that we're doing work that reflects our values. We're writing policies that treats our library workers well. We are breaking down barriers to access and truly being inclusive organizations wherever our institutions happen to sit. So making sure we've done work inside, so that as we try to catalyze good work in our communities, we can stand up with pride and say, our organization did this work too. We really believe in this. You can see it reflected in our policies and how we do work in our organizations, which brings more people to you to partner with you because they see that you're authentic and doing good work and can be a trusted partner, which leads you to being able to be very effective in this idea of civic participation and social cohesion. And as much technical speak we will do about the topics of mitigation and adaptation, at the end of the day, if people can't come together and bridge the divides we see in our communities today and learn to treat each other well and be empathetic to people, we really can't get very far. And that's honestly the most important thing we can be focused on, is increasing social cohesion. And that does require civic participation. So getting more people out of their homes, working together on small, doable, fun projects. So when the big tough stuff happens, they're used to working together. They can do so in a respectful way, and they've got those communication channels established. And then the very traditional climate action work that we just described of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and purposefully, strategically working on developing community resilience. And so you're going to see examples of all of these things interspersed throughout our presentation here today. At least that's our hope. We'll see. And if we don't do it, just ask us questions and we'll make sure you get better examples than we've pulled together here for you. But I'm just going to say that we'll go into the next section, and then we can certainly pause for questions if those come up. Feel free to use the chat at any point. Alex is going to help us gather those questions towards the end. But again, there'll be plenty of times for Q&A, so please don't think that we're going to take up all the air in the 90 minutes that you're giving us here today. Nardia, anything that I missed that you wanted to make sure we pointed out here in this first section? All right, cool. Thumbs up. So Edward asked us to talk a little bit about influencing decision makers, because it is hard to get this work off the ground in your institution without buy-in. And I don't know about you folks, but not everyone is the director and gets to make these decisions carte blanche. I know Nardia and Nardia is not the director. I was not the director of my institution when I started the work. I had to work personally very hard to make the case and get people on board with doing work in this area. So it might be fun to jump in and talk about all the minutia of what we actually did, but unless you can get over this hurdle of getting other people to work with you, it's hard to be effective and get very far. So this internal advocacy strategy is actually your number one thing to work on if this is an area you want to do more work in and see really impactful results in, which I'm guessing you do, because you've invited us to speak and you took some time this afternoon to be with us. So we wanted to share with you some of the experiences we've been having to get more buy-in so you can be effective in doing work in this topic. And it starts with any good advocacy effort, which is to really understand your audience. And Nardia and I are both going to speak to these 3 bullet points here, but framing within values has to happen. It can't just be your own value set and your own vocabulary that gets used to explain why we need to do work in this area and why we need to do work with urgency right now. So I'll just share that in my region, I cover a 3,000 square mile area. I have 66 libraries and thousands of people involved in these libraries and hundreds of politicians involved in these libraries. which means that I have the distinct pleasure of serving a region of New York where it's about half liberal and half conservative. So it means I have to walk a very careful line to make all parties understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and helping them to buy in. And I learned very early on that at the time I was doing this work, which I started over a decade ago, there were triggering words that were politicized by the media and politicians, and it was a non-starter for me in some communities to be talking about climate change. But if I just tweaked the phrase and I used energy independence, all of a sudden I had a whole new audience that wanted to be a part of what we were working on. But it was all the same stuff we were working on. So I think centering things within people's values and understanding where people are coming from, whether it's an administrator you're talking to that has to toe the line on a budget, or a politician who has constituents they're trying to keep happy, and understanding how, at the end of the day, let's just be honest, most people want to live in a safe environment where people get along. I know it doesn't feel like that sometimes, but when you really start talking to individuals, that's what comes out. And so finding the right language to connect to that kind of heartstring, what they value, is part of how we convince people to join us with this work. Now, Nardia works in a much more challenging environment politically than I do here in New York. So I think hearing from Nardia on this one is going to be, I don't want to say fun, but very interesting.
Yeah, so for us, when it comes to thinking about this concept and working within the system that you have, we are lightning rod because we're an educational institution. So oftentimes we get held up as like the marker for they aren't doing this right. And I'll go over a couple of different laws that have changed how we approach certain things. But like Rebekkah said, like when it came to government documents, for example, we couldn't write the word climate change in our documents because our previous governor would just negate anything that was written in the document if you had those words in it. Similarly, anything we do now, over the summer, in July, we had 3 different bills go through, and one of those bills was, I call it the DEI bill, if you will. And that bill, and I wanted to read off exactly what it says, but we could not really use the words diversity, equity, and inclusion anymore. So we had to think about the terms that we use so that we were looking at common languages. It's not necessarily that we couldn't use those terms, but anytime you put those terms there, the spotlight was put on that program. And for us, not only in the political sphere of our legislature, we had to think about what do our administrators want. When it came to sustainability at Valencia, they want to save money. So a lot of times we frame things in how they could save money. And I'm going to talk a little bit later in the presentation about some transportation options that we came up with. But specifically when it comes to Florida, here's some examples. So for example, House Bill 1521 made it a misdemeanor trespassing offense for someone to use a restroom that's not aligned to their sex at birth. That was just passed in July. So what the librarians did to lead that conversation was I reached out to our facilities person, and I reached out to our director of student affairs. We identified all the single occupancy use restrooms that are on campus, and we relabeled all of them so that it was single occupancy and there was no gender terms there. It not only helps our transgender students, it helps our students with disabilities, students who their caregivers are with them, or they might have children present. So that's a simple tweak. We were within the law, and that's all we did was re-identify the labels on the bathrooms. Another bill that affects us a lot is Senate Bill 266. This one banned public colleges and universities from spending money on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. This includes federal and private funds. So the law is pretty explicit, but they wrote in exceptions. So we take advantage of those exceptions because the groups that they wrote into the exception were a community college. 95% of our students fell into that exception. So we can build and use federal and private funds to help those groups, but maybe we don't use the terms diversity, equity, inclusion. We've started using terms like belonging, things like that. So we help them within the law, and we look at those exceptions. And another one that came through was like House Bill 3. It prohibits state and local investment in public money to promote environmental, social, governance investment decisions. So basically divestment. That one is the newest one. I'm not fully sure how that's going to affect us, because that's going to affect us on the county level, the school level, when it comes to divestment. One thing we're not sure of, if it's a high performing fund, can we invest in it? So those are some conversations that we're currently having. I'm not sure where that's going to lie, but that's some things to think about when you're framing your values for someone and thinking about where they are. I'm going to let Rebekkah talk first about strategic planning before I get in there.
We also really thought hard about, meeting people where they are. I think a lot of folks that chose to be on this webinar today, you've already been thinking a lot about the topic. You've got ideas, you see things in other places you want to bring into your organization. And as we start talking to folks that are the decision makers, we have to understand they don't all have the same level of understanding that we do. And Nardia's going to talk more about that from an educator perspective. But it's always important to keep in mind that we have to understand where they are in their understanding of the topic before we jump into the deep end and explain why they should be doing what we think they should be doing. And so, again, that goes back to strategic planning. And if your organization has gone through a strategic planning process, hopefully it involved input from community and constituents, to the work that your organization has identified as the goals of the organization, respecting where people are in a planning process and aligning with the goals they've chosen in that process. And this actually can work for either a library strategic plan or another institution tied to your library's strategic plan. So in my world, we have libraries with strategic plans, we have municipalities with strategic plans, and we try to find Venn diagrams, right? Where do we overlap in some of that work to build partnerships and accelerate work in our communities? And how do we tie in the work we want to do to those goals? And that goes back to the idea of framing as well. Nardia, you want to jump in on this one?
Yes. So one of the things I want to emphasize here when it comes to the strategic planning is, if you are coming to that, try to get in on the ground floor. So many people from library land do not show up. For example, Valencia has over 2,000 employees, but only 200 people were involved. A lot of them came from the library. So that is a really great way to sell what you offer to the people who are planning above. So that's one thing I want to emphasize, is be there. Another thing is, because Rebekkah mentioned the municipalities, one of the things that our sustainability committee did was we ensured that we let everybody know when these meetings were happening. We let them know when the county was doing their strategic plan. We let them know when the city was doing their strategic plan, because then you and the people who are involved and who get affected are at those meetings, and you can have your voice said. Because the amount of people that show up to these strategic planning meetings, whether you're going higher than the county or not, is surprisingly small. So a very small section of people are having their voice heard. The other thing that I like to mention sometimes is to think about your community health needs assessment. That one is done usually by your local hospital. For us, we do it at the Central Florida regional area. So we have 5 different counties that are involved in that, and different hospitals that group together. It's a great way to get voices in and see the importance and how you can tie in. The reason why I want to emphasize the community health needs assessment and when they do that project is because they not only look at the health, they fully look at the infrastructure and how everything affects health. So they're going to be looking at transportation. They're going to be looking at aspects. They're going to be looking at environmental impact. So all of these are health concerns in some way, homelessness. That is a really great way to connect with what your county might be looking at, because your county is also getting that information. They might be acting on that. And how does you as a library help with some of those things they've identified as an issue within your area? So those are some things that I like to emphasize when I think about strategic planning. Let the people in your library know. You know, they know.
Nardia, before we go on to the next slide, I just wanted to share one little story tied to strategic planning. And I'm happy to send a link to this article, but it was called Let Green Creep. And it was in Library Journal. And I feel like I'm getting old in the profession now, but I think it was almost 12 years ago now. But it was written by Louise Shaper, who is now retired, but she was the director of the Fayetteville Public Library in Arkansas. And they had built the first LEED building in Arkansas, the whole state. The library was the first LEED certified building in the entire state. And this was triggered by a comment I saw in the chat about facilities are perhaps built sustainably, but then are we operating them sustainably? Are we designing programs and services sustainably? So Louise, she wrote this whole article about how she finished building this building. It was a huge achievement, sat back, kind of wondering what the next chapter is, and she's mulling this over. And one night she was driving home from a community theater event, and she drove by the library at like 10 o'clock at night, and she saw every single light in the building on. And she's thinking to herself, like, well, that's not very green. And it triggered this whole process for her of thinking about everything they do at the library, from how they clean it to how they're powering the lighting to how they are buying materials for the offices. And it reminded her strategically, that was a strategic decision to create a sustainable building, but it was happening in isolation. And so how do you pull that thread through everything that you do? And it required bringing it into the strategic planning process to have it reflected in goals, to have it adopted as core values for the institution in order for it to permeate everything that was going on in the work. And that's part of what was a catalyst for the work we do at the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, is creating that systemic approach to how we do work and how we think about the decisions we make on an everyday basis. And that's why I love that Nardia wants to talk to you about process and systemic thinking and making the case here to our audiences.
I just want to be clear that we didn't start out with systems thinking in mind. We started thinking about individual projects, and we attacked them as individual projects. And it's best to, if you have the opportunity, to take a step back and see how all the systems connect. So systems thinking is basically looking not just as a part, but looking at the whole. And that's why I love the way the community health needs assessment work, is because they're looking at health, but they're looking at all the things that impact health. And that's one of the great ways to think about it from your library's perspective. So I'm from an academic library, so we look at it from the education perspective. So when you're thinking of things, we approach it similarly to other people. Since 2006, all of our buildings were either LEED certified or they were Green Globe certified. So we already were building new buildings that were green. The other thing that we thought about was from a transportation perspective. We looked at Valencia and said that half of our carbon footprint and carbon emissions was coming from transportation. So initially, when we started having that conversation about 8 years ago about transportation, we looked at it from a really tiny, small level. We said our libraries should check out bikes to people. But then we started checking out other libraries that loan bikes and seeing what happened. They're like, we have a hard time when it comes to repairs. So the solution that we came up as an interim solution was, let's invite bike share programs to be on campuses. Someone else is already doing that program. They manage the bikes, they repair them. So for our downtown campuses, and I should have explained, we have multiple campuses. We have 7 different campuses. And so for our downtown campuses, we're like, bike share programs, come on campus. Students can borrow the bikes. You all are in charge of repairing them. We've got a repair station. Most campuses have a repair station so they can repair their own bike that they had them. But one of the things that we realized from the sustainability committee that I was working on is that, hey, we're talking about bike shares and encouraging employees and students to do bikes, but our policy state that motorized vehicles can't be on campus. And if we really want employees to campus, they need to be able to use their electric bike. So we had to revisit our bike policy. So again, we're starting out small and we're getting bigger, but we reevaluated our motorized vehicle policy. And then when we did that, we were like, but we don't really have sidewalks. So we had to evaluate that. So what we did was, from the sustainability committee, it went up to the head of the college, and we decided to put capital funds in to expand our multi-use pass. So some campuses suddenly did get multi-use pass. Some campuses finally got sidewalks. And while we were thinking about that, that's where the system thinking started. So the county and different cities were putting in multi-use paths. So let's go to their meetings and encourage them to build paths that connect to our campuses. We knew that we couldn't build those paths right away, but if we encouraged the county and the city, since they already were going to do that, to build paths that connect to our campuses, then when we get the funds, we can connect to them easily. And it creates a seamless process for not only our students, but our employees so that they can easily get from their homes to campus. So it's kind of like a backwards, we did a backwards way. The other thing that we did is when we thought about systems, we were like, okay, let's say they don't have their own bike. Can they take the bus because it might be faster? So we provided free bus for our students. That's how we first started. And then we were like, but employees need that as well. So we provided our employees with free buses. So we've given over 1 million free rides on the bus. And the greatest thing is that University of Central Florida, which is the second largest university in the nation, adopted that program. So we're not just helping our students, we're also helping the students' employees in the area so that they can take the bus, which reduces that transmission. And then finally, systems thinking, we finally determined what our goal was going to be. So we decided to be carbon neutral by 2050. So my point of that is that we started out with these small little projects, but now that we have the goal in mind, we can be more strategic about what we do instead of piecemealing some of those projects that we look at. So yes, we already build green, but what are we doing with those other systems to reduce our carbon emission?
That's such a good story, Nardia, because I think it speaks to the overwhelming nature of this topic. When I was breaking down the climate action formula we like to use, right? You start to realize it touches on everything. It's not just the cup you're recycling, it's where the cup was made and what the natural resources were and where it's going at the end of its useful life. And it just becomes kind of like this, like the title of the movie that won the Oscar this year, like everything all at once, and it gets overwhelming. And so recognizing the steps that are involved and how it can lead to bigger and bigger things, if you start at the top with the policy, it can just be crushing. So I love that example, Nardia. Thank you for sharing. Excuse me. The other really key thing we saw as we were getting our efforts off the ground, at least in my own organization and many others involved in the program, is the issue of encouragement versus judgment. And what I heard in my now staff and board that I was working with to get our project off the ground, we saw a lot of defensiveness as we started to talk about what we wanted to do. And that was very much so because they felt judged by decisions they were making personally. Like everyone's reading, they're all watching the headlines, they understand what's going on in the world, but not everyone has created the perfectly balanced, environmentally sound life. So as we began talking about this project, we actually started by listing everything we already do that really fits into this model of the triple bottom line, which we're going to explain here in just a second. But inviting people to share what they already do, to consistently use the phrase progress, not perfection. This opened the door for trial and error, be iterative. Matthew Bollerman, who's the co-founder of the Sustainable Library Initiative, I told him if he says the word iterative one more time when we were planning this whole thing, we were going to scream. But it really is what is necessary, because there's no one path in the work that we're doing here, and we want to invite as many people to the table as possible. So being very encouraging, not too judgmental. We know we want to lord over everyone, everything we know about the topic, but we have to offer it gently in some cases for purpose, not just to demonstrate we know what we're doing. So encouraging people to be part of the process instead of telling them we're behind on this. We are behind on this, but that's not where we start the conversation, right? We want to say we want to try something different. We want to go faster on this topic. We think there's ways to do that work by bringing more people to the table to work on this. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this instead of saying we're failing on this. We could do way better on this. This organization over here is doing this. We're not doing that. The tone of that conversation, it can be life or death, honestly, to the whole project if you're embarking on it. So I know, Nardia, you're very good at this as well. Do you want to speak on this slide?
So for me, when it comes to encouragement versus judgment, encouragement is the biggest thing. And we'll talk a lot later about encouraging people by talking about what they're already doing, because it's debilitating when you tell someone that you're not doing this right, versus we can start out by thinking about how can that we make the stepping into this a seamless process. And I personally think sometimes it starts with getting your cheerleaders. because your cheerleaders are the people who are really happy and active to do this. And sometimes it might be celebrating something that they already do. So when you celebrate that thing that they already do, they become your cheerleader, and they're more likely to change a habit that might not be as constructive to helping reduce climate change. And the best way that I learned this was when our director of sustainability, I invited her to talk to the library because I was the only person in the library interested in it. So I was like, would you come to the library and have a talk with us to introduce the topic? And she was brilliant at it. She's like, don't throw everything away, because one, that's wasting money and you're putting waste. Change things when your product is finished. So for your library, maybe that's thinking about green cleaning products. Maybe the time when your cleaning products are finished is the time that you can think about going green when it comes to the cleaning products. So it's that you meet people where they are financially and when they're ready to change. And usually when you're ready to change is when something is either depleting or finishing, or you're thinking about making a different change.
So change is the goal here. We want a mindset change amongst our people we work with in our organizations and the people who make decisions about our communities. And so as we thought about how to be impactful in this work, one of the biggest keys to the success of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative has been a common vocabulary, because we kept throwing around the word sustainability, and we did it here already in the first part of this webinar. And a lot of folks are still like, what are you talking about when you mean sustainability? We talk about financial sustainability. We talk about environmental sustainability. What do you really mean? And so we adopted the triple bottom line definition of sustainability. And it's a business concept. We own that, but we think it translates really well to the work that we do, because it really focuses on the true answer here, which is balance. That we have to find balance amongst these three things. And sometimes this is called the three-legged stool. And that's because if one of these things is off balance, the stool tips over. But the idea is finding balance among the traditional things we've always focused on, which is the bottom line, how much something costs, but integrating thinking about how is this decision going to impact the people involved in it as well as the environment? And can we make better decisions that bring these things into balance? And this really helped me in particularly more fiscally conservative communities that I work in, when we were trying to convince them to build a more sustainable building. And they had this fallacy that it costs more to build green. And the truth was, if you actually do it right and you work with the right people, it doesn't cost any more than traditional construction approaches at the time. But they needed that balance of, it's not just the money we're talking about. It has to incorporate thinking about the environment and people and how people are treated because of the decisions that are being made. And using this construct has worked out very, very well, because it scales. It scales for when you're talking about a product like a pen. It scales for when you're talking about a program. It scales for when you're talking about a building. It scales for when you're talking about a community. The idea of balance and respecting these three elements as best we can, again, progress, not perfection, creates environments in which we're going to do better than we did yesterday. So adopting this mindset is what actually you'll see in the definition from the American Library Association. They specifically use the same definition we did to start to help people understand we're not talking about going green. We're talking about systemic change that has to acknowledge all of these issues are coming to bear in this moment. And that's where people get overwhelmed, because we're talking about systemic racism. We're talking about years and years of abuse of the natural world. We're talking about chronic underfunding of libraries. And what the heck are you supposed to do with all that? And you can hear the tension in my voice, because those are all real things, right? But we have to find a way forward, right? So we have to find where those balance points are and to make better decisions moving forward. So for example, in my organization, we prioritized investing in local businesses. If at all possible, we can purchase products and services from a local business. We want to invest our money, which is their money, tax money, back into the local economy. Now, what's the reality of purchasing local over buying something from Amazon? It's going to cost a little more. So we had to change our thinking. Our policy had to allow for, we decided on a 10% premium if we're going to purchase local. If we could justify that, we could go ahead and make that purchase. Sometimes we can't, but now more often we can. So we were balancing the idea that it's not just the lowest bidder It's the lowest qualified bidder. And when we defined what qualified means, it may mean that local people get preference in our decision-making structure. So just one example of how that comes into play. But this model of the triple bottom line, that common vocabulary, it's accelerated the work in our profession. It accelerated the work in my organization when we started working on things, and helped people understand we weren't just talking about recycling. We weren't just talking about riding your bike to work. We were talking about a whole new way of thinking about the entire world, where things come from, and how people are impacted by the decisions that we make, large and small. Nardia, anything else you want to add on this one?
That was beautiful. Thank you.
All right, Nardia, you want to start us off on the importance of networking?
So for me, when it comes to networking, and again, ASHE, the reason why I want to mention them is because they use the same definition of the triple bottom down theory. So everybody who's part of ASHE has that common vocabulary. For me, again, I'm coming from a higher education standpoint, but I do think this works for a lot of different institutions. You might actually have heard of ASHE STAR when it comes to energy for buildings, but it provided an opportunity for our institution to network with other people in the area. We were brand new to some of these conversations when we decided to look at it strategically instead of just piecemeal. So having different people, different organizations that were looking at it, going to the conferences was really helpful for us when we wanted to think about this outside of Florida. I had the wonderful opportunity to present at the ASHE conference. So it's not only presenting, but getting an idea of what other people were doing. So we talked specifically how we introduced students who, well, technically they weren't students yet. We were trying to get them to come to our school, but putting things about library and sustainability in those STEM camps, so that they can get an idea of what it means. And we had the SDG. So going there and then networking with people and them talking about, hey, we're in the architecture program, and we decided to have people design so that we can think about when floods happen in their area. And I thought that was brilliant to have those conversations and network with different people. And the reason why I have the ASHE logo with the sustainability curriculum consortium is because this is their new partnership. So for all of us, in some way, shape, or form, we're in education. Whether you're a public library or a K through 12 library, you're providing some form of education. So it might be worthwhile to reach out, take a look at what they have, and see if it might be informative for your members.
So we wanted to focus on networking here because we are not the only people working in this space, and we're, I hate to say it, a little behind the curve in a couple of areas. So you can see these organizations that have already formed, they're already thinking about this work, and they're great allies to have a wider level of impact. So when we talked about the triple bottom line, and you start realizing the holistic and really systemic nature of these issues, you recognize that no one organization or group of folks is going to be able to turn the tide, as they say. So when we think about networking, part of it is talking about what we're doing and what our goals are, using some of this language, the triple bottom line, social equity, environmental stewardship, community resilience, using this language and adopting this language so that, you know, we fit in quicker in conversations with folks that are working on similar things. And on the right-hand side, you see an example from my world, which is called the Library of Local. It's a project that was started thanks to a phone call that was from a funder that was triggered by one of my member library directors who knew I was pretty passionate about sustainability. And she happened to be at a cocktail party and was chatting up with this guy, and he was talking about how he was putting together a whole group of funders who were going to underwrite work in the Hudson Valley here in New York related to sustainability and building community resilience. And she's like, well, you should really talk to Rebekkah. She thinks about this all the time. And he's like, well, why? And she's like, well, because libraries. And she was like, she goes, I just like blanked. Like, what do I say? She's like, I just kept saying, call Rebekkah, call Rebekkah. So this guy calls me and he's like, hey, Rebekkah, do you think libraries have anything to do with community resilience? And I'm like, do I ever? Right. And I had the language, I'd been thinking about it a lot. I understood how I thought libraries can play a role in this work. And we started talking about the need for grassroots work to help people come together and learn how to build more resilience in our communities, through working together, but also recognizing what was climate hazards were focused on the Hudson Valley specifically. And so we designed this program that they happily funded. It was the easiest money I have ever gotten for my organization, that resulted in 16 of my libraries becoming what we call libraries of local, where they have specialized collections on climate solutions and food security. They all have seed libraries, and they lend out tools for gardening. They are all partners with what are called Climate Smart Communities, which is a state program that helps municipalities accelerate work in climate change and climate change adaptation. And it's resulted in all these amazing new partnerships. Over 50 new partnerships across my system have been seeded, because of this partnership with this funder who was so excited about the work that we were doing. They formed a whole new nonprofit called the Partners for Climate Action in Hudson Valley. And it's resulted in a whole community of practice across our now 8-county area that was all seeded and sparked by work we were doing through those 16 libraries who stepped up to be libraries of local. So speaking the language of allies, of inserting yourself into these conversations, of making connections and putting the right people together. I know, Nardia, when you began your process with the Sustainable Library Certification Program, you had to find that network on campus, right? You ended up connecting with the right people at the right time that accelerated your work on behalf of the library.
Definitely, and I will share that that was the longest part of our process for us, is making sure that we had the right people who were part of our team, who were dedicated to the process and interested in bringing it to fruition. So coming up with the information, I'll talk a little bit more about what we were doing, because I had to convince people by talking to the whole library team. First, I can start deans, and then I had to have meetings with the whole library team to say, this won't be a heavy lift because we're already doing this, and this. So it's really important when you start with those like-minded people. You might come at it from different angles, but I think that's also why we talk about that systems thinking. If we can figure out that thing that we have in common, we can all approach it together.
I love how Nardia makes complicated things sound simple. So we're doing our own little smirk pause here, recognizing we're throwing a lot at you here at the midway point in the webinar, and that it can feel overwhelming. We understand that. And we come from that place ourselves of just fighting not to feel overwhelmed anymore and to find a path forward for action that makes a difference. So this is our just acknowledgement slide that it's a lot of information all at once. And then we also have to keep that in mind as we're talking to others about the topic. If we're trying to convince people to do the work with us, as well as pull in stakeholders from outside of our institutions, it's easy for people to feel overwhelmed, which leads to paralysis. So how do we simplify things? How do we make it doable? How do we celebrate the small wins and really help people want to keep working together? And as Nardia described, on bigger and bigger projects that have bigger and bigger impact. So moving into the other thing that we were asked to talk about, which is, you're doing excellent work, and we're certainly going to be taking a look at some examples of what our libraries have been doing in the program. But how do you communicate externally with communities and constituents to help them see the work that you're doing and recognize it, but also participate in it? We talked about the characteristics of a sustainable library, the second of which being a catalyst for social cohesion and civic participation. That means getting people up and out of their houses and engaging with the work that you're doing and seeing good things come from that effort. And Nardia and I have kind of hinted twice already that the best place to start is talking about what you're already doing in this sphere. That's exactly where we start when we're in the certification program, actually, is itemizing everything you're already doing that fits the triple bottom line model to help people see this isn't a big stretch. We're already doing work in this area. What else could we be doing? It helps see the way for people to understand success breeds success.
And I'm going to say that that is the crux of it. It's sometimes things are done at our institutional level, so outside of the library, up and above the library. So if we want to take a look at the library itself, so I talked a lot about strategic planning and things like that at the institutional level, but what can the library itself do? And one of the things that I like to say that we did really well, we act as a pilot area. So whether you're thinking about your school itself, or your county of schools, or you're thinking about one library within your system, if you have more than one library, or your library being a test environment for your campus. That's where a library can be a really great place to test things out for the college or your institution, to say we can make this bigger if we test it out in the library. Why not use us? So that's one of the really great ways that we can place ourselves. So one of the things that we started out with is we have QR codes to help prevent leaks. So leaks cost the college a lot of money, whether it's wasting money or in the repairs that the damage does. We live in Florida, leaks are big, repairing a whole entire roof. So we have QR codes. People can scan the QR codes and it alerts facilities. So we were a test area for that. So that's just something so simple. Another thing is writing utensils and battery recycling. We can save the landfill, we can recycle that, but more importantly, our institution is really interested in the money that it generated. So the library tested it out. Everybody from the campus would mail me their packages, big giant packages. We use a lot of markers, especially in math. They're always writing on the board. So we recycled that. We saved them money. And now on one bin on every floor has those recycling containers, because we realized, oh, we can get money from this recycling option. Another thing that we did, printer ink. We started out with our 7 libraries where everybody could bring your printer ink and they'd recycle it. It actually earned the college a lot of money, and we did sell it that way. We said we can earn the college money if we recycled these, and let's test it out. So now in everybody's mailbox, you can put your ink in the mailbox and the college will recycle it on your behalf. But let's think about your institution as a whole. So for my institution in particular, we're a Hispanic serving institution. 39% of our student population is Hispanic. And one of the reasons why is we had climate refugees. We had a lot of people come from Puerto Rico to one of our nearby counties. And of course, we made it possible for them to come to school. We had different programs so that they can get trained. We provide funding so that they could have living expenses taken care of, so that they could get those really quick programs. They were like 4-week programs until they can get into a degreed program later on. So those are some things that you can think about. Additionally, and from another standpoint is 60% of the students at our school are low income students and they qualify for Pell Grants. So a Pell Grant means it's federal funding for their education. But although it provides some funding, it doesn't provide for everything. So a great standpoint that libraries are at, we bridge that digital divide. We provide our students with access to desktop computers so they can use those computers. We check out laptops. So we loan laptops for either 4 hours or 7 days so they can bring it home. When the pandemic happened, prior to the pandemic, we talked about this, but it wasn't feasible. But when the pandemic happened, our college was like, yes, we will let you loan hotspots. So we recognized they could not do any of their work. Yes, we loaned them. Every campus loaned our laptops out so they could have them for the semester. We realized they needed those hotspots so that they can get online. So our libraries act as those digital divides. We provide them with technology in our tech petting zoo so they can test out different technologies before they purchase it. Another thing that we looked at initially is saving our student money when it came to printing. And the reason why we used to lose these flimsy plastic cards. From the library standpoint, we were like, they're losing money and that's a lot of plastic waste. From the college standpoint, they saved $20,000 by moving away from that. So we were using these plastic cards. They'd put money on the card. Their name's not associated with it. They'd lose their card. So we don't know whose card that belongs to. They've lost money. So we were wasting a lot of plastic because every time they lost their card, they'd buy another one. And each card costs $1 before you even put money on there. So we not only saved our students money, we reduced the plastic use. So now we have their ID, their college ID is their library card. The other thing that we did in that same process is for the printers, we reminded them how much paper they were using. So in their interface, when they log in to add funds, it tells them exactly how much paper they're using. And it has like a pretty little icon to tell them how many trees they can save if they double side. So little things like that. We're already doing something as part of one process and we can think about that. And from our standpoint, and I'll talk a lot later about textbook affordability, but one of the things, whether you're in an academic library or you are in a public library, you can think about the Creative Commons certification. It's a free certification program that you can be part of. And we use that. So two of our librarians went and got the Creative Commons certification. And what that allowed them to do was train the trainers. So now they can teach other faculty members on how to create content that other people can use and how they can use other people's content while thinking about copyright. And that reduces the amount of cost to our students. And I'll go a little bit more into textbook affordability a little bit later.
So you can
Interesting.
see, oh, sorry, Nardi.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that this idea of let's show what we've already done, which builds people's belief that you can do more together, I think is a way to get started and helping communicate inside and outside of your organization about this work and how we're going to do more of it together. And that leads to really the next thing that has to happen, which is internal education for staff, that common vocabulary. Look at all the stuff we already do that exemplifies this vocabulary, that triple bottom line thinking and sustainability as a core value, and help them really understand the why behind some of these things that we're doing. So Nardia just gave you, I think, half a dozen examples of things we are doing, but why are we doing that? And so we assume people understand that, but they do not always understand. Where does plastic come from? What are the materials used to make that? Where does it go at the end of its useful life? That's why we should care about this topic. So again, not assuming we know where people are on some of this work, and really helping them get the tools they need to make better decisions in their sphere of influence of the work they do in their organization. Where can they be influential in making suggestions or making different choices moving forward? Because the goal here is to decentralize all of this work so that every individual in the organization takes their own responsibility for making better decisions using the triple bottom line. So this explanation, demonstration, giving them the tools they need to make better decisions and moving forward, it really invites them and empowers them to participate at the level that's necessary. Because everything we're reading at this point about climate change adaptation is that we have to go faster than anyone has ever worked on anything ever in the history of the planet. And that includes COVID. And we worked pretty fast on COVID, although people will say we didn't. So as we think about how to mobilize as many people as possible on this topic, let's give them a fighting chance. Let's educate them on the topic, show them what it can look like, empower them to go further and make different decisions. The pictures that you're seeing here are some fun things we did in my workplace where we were celebrating Earth Day every year. And we started doing so in way more interactive ways that were actually educational events for our staff to learn the difference between what goes literally in the garbage versus what our carting company actually takes for recycling, and what really composting could look like. We ended up piloting composting because of this event we did in our organization. We learned we had a lot of aspirational recycling going on, things that you pick up and look at and you're like, of course this should be recyclable, but actually wherever we happen to live, they were not recyclable. So the people that did the best on our little sorting task, the team, I found out my staff is super competitive. I already knew that, but they received this, you can't see the whole picture of it there, but it is our upcycled trophy for the team that wins the Earth Day event every year. We've done this for 5 years now, and they work hard to get that trophy and have the bragging rights. And that trophy is made out of bottle caps, old books, string, an old CD you see there at the front of the award, but it exemplifies the goal of the entire day, is thinking differently about stuff and where it's going. And Nardi, if I'm not mistaken, you did a lot of work on staff education at the beginning of your process as well.
Yes, so we had to get everybody on the same page so that we were, again, having that common language. So when we're talking about sustainability, we all know what we mean. It's not just climate change, it's not just environment. It's thinking holistically. But more importantly, I actually want to think about not just the eco-literacy training, because the thing, we don't have a lot of funding. So we had to think about what low budget ways can we do these trainings. And we are fortunate in Florida in that we have Florida Virtual Campus, where all of our state colleges, universities, and K through 12 go through the same similar library system. So they provide a lot of free training, and they were already providing training when it came to sustainability. So it was inviting our employees to attend. And the key here that I wanted to talk about was, when we talk about that invitation to participate, it's not just people at the top, but people at lower levels, part-time employees, getting them to say, hey, you can have an hour off the desk to participate in this training. And what we ended up finding out is that a lot of employees were really passionate about this topic, and some of them were actually doing it in their own life. They were working with other organizations. So it's like getting them on board and making sure that their voice is heard. I think that's really important. And not only when you think about that, but regular communication. So not only are they communicating to you, you're communicating to them. Here's these free seminars, a free webinar that you can participate, especially for our state where it's free for them to participate and we don't have to think about sending them to a conference and things like that.
So the staff education is, as we were asked here to talk today about how do you get the word out that you're doing this good work, your staff are the number one point of word of mouth marketing for anything you do. I think we all know that, right? Like when you want a new product to be adopted by patrons, the best point of sale is your staff talking it up with them. And that is the case throughout library land. But there's so many other things we do to get the word out. The staff is number one, but there's all these nonverbal cues that we can give as well. And I want to ask Nardia to talk about this because they did an amazing job on this.
So for us, I'm going to say our nonverbal cues are first start with your website. Super easy approach if you have one. I understand that everybody has one, but if, for example, in your municipality you have a web page, tell them what you do about sustainability. It's an opportunity to share your story and provide visuals. Like celebrate your wins, right on your website. For us, when it comes to that, as an institution, we're part of Tree Campus USA, which we have been awarded. It's for the Arbor Day Foundation, been awarded it once every year for the last 10 years. Now, you could just think about it as planting a tree, but we wanted to think about it in a larger context of a tree plan. So whenever a tree is dying or dead, or a shrub for that matter, that's when we replace it with a tree that's Florida friendly and a tree that is native. So those are the things that we think about. And the other aspect of that is thinking about and tree that provides edibles. So it might be a fruit tree, something. And again, I wanted to emphasize that our students are low income students. So can they pick that fruit? That's something that we have to think about. And not only is that an advertisement, we also use it as an educational moment. So some of those trees have signs in front of them and they tell you a little bit about the tree. They can scan the QR code or the trees have labels. So it's an educational opportunity and we are thinking about the larger system of it. For us, we like to think about it in the context of our events. So libraries host a lot of events that we like to think about build into it. So for example, next month, October is Campus Sustainability Month. We are giving people an opportunity to see what the library does, and we're giving back to this community as a whole. So for example, this week we just lost Essentials, which is our food pantry. 40% of our students have reported that they do not eat regularly during their weeks. So we just got a grant to provide them with meals on campus. So for the library to help them launch that, we are doing a food drive. We normally do different food drives where we're making it big, bold, and getting people involved. You can sell that story. And on one of the pictures, it is a sign and it's practice. And the reason why I talk about these bins are max R bins. You do not have to spend that much money on their bins, but the bins are made of post-recycled material. The entire bin is made of no drugs. It says it right on the corner so everybody can see. We are investing in these. Not only that, the bins say sustainability. It has signage of what should go where. It's all in one place. So you've got your landfill and recycling in one place. That's really important for us because when a person can't find the recycle bin, it goes in the trash. And the other thing that we thought about it was, where do the bins go? And so for the library, we put the bins strategically at our heavy traffic area. So it might be our exit entrance, or for us, where we have a Dunkin' Donuts, let's just say that. We have a Dunkin' Donuts right in the building, so there's a trash can right there. So you can put your plastics and your trash in two different receptacles. And for us, when you go from campus to campus, this also helps with the visuals because you don't have to guess what goes where anymore. It's not a different color. My fun thing is when we used to have the gray bins, which the gray bins are in employee areas, but for our student population, they see the one bin. So they don't have to think about, what does gray mean? Does blue mean recycle? like they're different sizes, and those are some things that we wanted to make it approachable and easy for our student population. And so I'm going to go into a little bit. I said earlier in the presentation I was going to talk about textbook affordability. The wonderful thing about being in Florida is we pool our resources. I talked about the fact that we pool it not just at the library level, we pool it at the state level. So all of our 40 state colleges and institutions work together as part of Florida Virtual Campus. That's actually done by our legislature. So that's a win for our legislature that they've done. They create a seamless environment for our students. So we have the same library management system across every institution. So they have that same interface. It reduces getting to know how to search for different resources. It allows us to pool our resources when it comes to providing reference help. So each institution that's part of it volunteers an hour or two of their time. So we provide reference to people in their states 7 days a week by pooling our resources that way. Specifically when it comes to pooling our resources, our educational resources. So Open Florida is an online interface. Students, faculty members, members of the community, librarians can put open educational resources in that database. People can search it and adopt it within their institution. Not only that, they have a conference once a year, and it allows for people to have discussions. And those discussions are really important because it's all about reducing the barriers for adaptation. And by having that conference, by having people who are involved, highly involved in the work coming together, being part of this, it helps the entire state. And we absolutely love that. And I wanted to talk about our volunteer reader and our volunteer writer. By 2019, we saved our students over $20,000. Did I say 20,000? $200,000 when it came to textbooks. And basically what it is, and you can kind of see a picture of it on the very far right, is that we have access to different databases with poems, books, chapters. Is we create it as a book, but we use our LibGuide to do that. And it is the course book. It started out at one campus and now it's been adopted college-wide. When it comes to saving our students money on textbooks, that's really important. One of the things that FLVC did is in 2016, they surveyed students across the entire state. And they found out that most students, I think it was 67% of students, their textbook costs over $300. For Valencia, that's really big because our classes cost $310. That's an entire class and it's a textbook. So if we can save them money in any way we can, we want to make sure that they have access. So we have our OER research guide, and that is actually meant for faculty members. It gives them different resources, different subject areas where they can find textbooks within their area. And then we have our counterpart guide where we have textbooks that have already been adopted by your department. Do you want to use this textbook? So we make it super easy for them to approach textbook affordability and save our students funds.
Other really visible thing we're seeing a lot of libraries in the program do are really expand their thinking on the library of things, which is very visible. It's interactive. It brings people into the library that maybe haven't been there in a very long time. They're surprised often that libraries do this type of thing. And just to brag a little bit, the Curtis Memorial Library, which is the first library in the state of Maine to finish the Sustainable Library Certification Program, has literally the best library of things in the country, if I do say so myself. I went to visit them on my vacation at the end of August, and I was blown away by this collection and the thoughtfulness of it. They've embedded the collection within the print collection. So for example, when you're in the nonfiction area and you're in the sciences section, there's all the citizen science kits for how folks can empower themselves to help collect data that helps to inform scientists' work in the community. You see all sorts of just the list of stuff they have is truly amazing. It's really a very cool collection, but it's visible. It gets people out. They're interacting with the library in a new way. And a lot of the materials in the library of things encourages the behavior we hope to see. Participating in citizen science, hosting events in the community. They have a whole kitchen section for hosting events. Things that normally people don't want to have to own because they take up a lot of space in their homes are held at the library. You can just borrow them when you need them. And looking at the technology that they're lending out there, again, to empower people to go further and do good work for their educational needs or whatever they're working on in the community. So certainly there are ways to signal to our communities that we do good work. And so this is a very visible way this library is doing this, but also I think it spurs action, right? There's kits to help people get out into nature, learn about birds. I felt like it was endless as I was looking at this list of cool things that they're doing. But again, it's putting your money where your values are, building collections that speak to what we're trying to achieve in our communities and to catalyze action. So it's not just learning in the traditional sense of, libraries, everyone equates us with books, but we've never been about just books. We're about what's inside those books, the education, the learning about experiences in our world and helping people connect with the wider world. And this is a new way of developing collections that helps us do that. And that was the thinking behind the Library of Things, the Library of Local program I mentioned before. I think I did a pretty good job describing that earlier, so I'm not going to go into it, but I threw this QR code on the slide if you wanted to quickly connect with the information about that program. Now, the other thing we wanted to talk about is the topic of engagement. So Library of Things is a kind of a gateway entry point to engaging with our communities in a very passive, perhaps introverted way. But what we're seeing more and more libraries in the certification program are really taking engagement to new levels to get new people into our libraries and doing perhaps non-traditional activities, but being the catalyst for community service. So you've got I think we're going to turn this slide over to Nardia because the work they've been doing on Pookie's Pantry, which I love the name of that, has been really inspirational.
And then I talked a little bit before about our pantry work is that we created a whole month to celebrate them, but we have the donation bins right in the library. So you can partner with an outside organization and collect food for that organization because you have a lot of foot traffic in the library. And that's one of the ways. The other ways that we have there is we partner with different student organizations. They're already working with the community. Some of our librarians are actually advisors to those clubs. So when they go out in the community, they're working with the community. So it's a two-way street, the community, the educational facility. And when it comes to the public library, working with different organizations.
This is the Mamakating Library, a more rural public library here in New York that's part of our program. And they work very hard to make sure people are connecting with people. So they really focus on events that look a bit non-traditional. You can see the giant Jenga game going on in the front lawn of the library and making sure they're participating and helping people getting together and just socializing together and seeing people as people and creating opportunities to interact with each other between groups that normally would never get together. So this library has done an awesome job there. And I just want to say the little picture on the left of the bike with the basket, they do moonlight bike rides on the rail trail, which just sounds so romantic to me. But the other thing we wanted to share with you is a program that got its start at the Suffolk Cooperative Library System. You heard us talk about Alex, who's helping to run the program here today. He's our technical support for the webinar. They started a program a few years ago that I thought was so amazing. We actually now do it statewide. It's called the Great Give Back. It is a day of community service at your library. We have hundreds of libraries across the state that now participate, and they are catalysts for good work in their community on a Saturday in October. We all know libraries do good work for their community every single day, but are we known for it? No. Do we get the credit for it? No. So the idea is to raise the profile of the work we're doing, and we're seeing an increasing number of libraries choose community service projects that are related to the triple bottom line. So we're seeing more libraries hosting community cleanups of a park or a creek bed. We're seeing recycling programs. We're seeing, like Pookie's Pantry, drop off donations for other institutions that need your support. And so the library as catalyst, as space, as a placemaking organization has really been growing and growing thanks to this program. And luckily, we're getting excellent press about it too. We've got the hashtag, we've got the press releases, we've got legislators coming over for photo ops. especially, and I'll just say the most popular program that gets done is the pet adoption event at the libraries. Everyone wants to come play with the pets and get their photos taken for that event. But it exemplifies the idea of really what is behind climate justice is that respect and understanding and empathy and getting people to work together. And let's start small on some small projects so we can work together on the bigger stuff. So just to wrap up here, and then we're happy to take questions. We've mentioned the certification program several times. The program is designed, we have a program for public libraries and academic libraries and one for school librarians, because their world is very, very different from those of us that kind of control more of our buildings and our policy world. But the program for our public and academic libraries helps you walk through 12 different categories of actions that ultimately are designed around the triple bottom line, but also are all thinking about how to change your mindset over time. So going through the process as a team in your organization, it helps to exercise the muscle of making decisions using the triple bottom line over and over and over again, till it just becomes the way we do business at our library. It becomes the culture, our organizational culture of how we make decisions. So there's actually no other program like this out there for libraries. It is a methodology. It is one way to go about doing this work. It's a way to fast track doing the work and making better decisions and having more of an impact in your community at a wider range, perhaps, than can be done by doing something homegrown. We're not saying there's no way to do it homegrown. There certainly is. But if you're looking for a community of practice that can accelerate the work, this has become a proven path forward that both Nardia's organization and mine has completed. You can see the stories of libraries who have completed this program on the website. Just go to sustainablelibrariesinitiative.org and you can check out the final presentations of libraries that have finished. You can learn a ton just from checking out those presentations. But as you look through them, keep in mind, everything they did had this in mind. Finding better balance across our policies, our collections, our service and program designs, how we seek out partnerships in the world we operate our institutions in. It always comes back to the triple bottom line, finding balance and making better decisions for tomorrow than we did yesterday. So the Sustainable Libraries Initiative website, once you get there, you'll see tons of free stuff there. You can sign up for the newsletter, download the mobile app, come to our webinars. We have our next webinar is featuring the Kingston Library in Ulster County, New York. They did a 12-month sustainability challenge with their community. So helping to educate their community in really bite-sized pieces of information about 12 different topics related to sustainability, giving them reading recommendations, easy, small actions they could take to make an impact. It's really, really cool. So in December, you can come listen to Addie at the Kingston Library talk about that. If you wanted to join and be a member, you can access a few additional resources that we've customized, a CO2 calculator, vendor and program ideas. You get free access to our ALA e-course that we created with them this year. And then if you really want to go all in and take advantage of that methodology, that's the certification program. But we invite you to be part of the community of practice, whether you join or not. Come join the Facebook group, be on the webinars, come hang out with us at events. It's the best way to learn about this is listening to other colleagues who are doing work in this area as well. So I don't know if any other questions have come in via chat, but we're happy to take any questions that folks have or have occurred to you in the course of the webinar.
We definitely have a lot of enthusiastic comments in the chat about what you guys have been talking about. There was one question that came up in the beginning. It was about transportation mitigation. This person was saying they're confused about why everyone focuses on electric cars when there are so many alternatives that mitigate more, are more affordable for lower and middle class people, and less reliance on mining, for example, copper, nickel, graphite, cobalt.
Yeah, and that there's no one way to fix the transportation challenge that we have in this world. And I think we also have to keep in mind, what is the ultimate goal of the choices that we're making? So the mining issue for batteries is no joke. It's a major problem. It's going to continue to be a major problem. But on the other side of the equation, if the grandest challenge of our generation is climate change and greenhouse gas emissions are what fuels climate change, we have to find new ways to get off of fossil fuels. So it might not be the final answer or the most widely adopted answer, but it's where money is being invested right now. So thinking about how we promote education around these topics to show people what the alternatives are. Nardia gave you such good examples of how to get people engaged in other modes of transportation and promoting that through library programs. So again, no one answer to any of this stuff, but we do have to keep in mind climate change is the grandest challenge. We've got to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. What are the most viable paths forward to do that? Let's figure that out.
So I don't know if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask any questions.
Hi, this is Edward from Marian University. Thank you very much for this highly informative talk. I wanted to say this is more of a comment, but I really appreciate the emphasis that you placed on listing what you do. You know, we don't have a sustainability department here at our institution. We don't really have a sustainability coordinator. There is someone in facilities who is sustainable minded. But just listing some of the things that we do in reference to what you have listed here, I think really lowers the intimidation factor, and that we can actually do things. We can not just, you know, do things practically, but we can also take the initiative in highlighting this stuff. We're getting a library newsletter sort of gaining momentum via email. And I really do think that having like a small step of just adding a couple things every newsletter in terms of what we're doing or what we are even planning on doing, I think that that might go a long way. Do you have like dedicated sustainability sections in your newsletters, or do you have just sustainability focused newsletters for your institutions? Sorry if I rambled there.
No, that's okay. Before I answer your question, I just wanted to high five you through Zoom because you picked up on one of the key elements of the program, which is that this is a marketing strategy. We are, you know, positioning libraries to talk about what we do in new ways. And it doesn't always mean doing things different or new or finding new resources to get new things done. It's sometimes just talking about what we already do in a new way, because we all struggle to get people to connect with the value of what we do and sometimes just what we do. So thinking about how we repackage some of those things that we have already done successfully and talking about them under the umbrella of sustainability can get you further along than just sitting here and thinking, well, being irritated that people don't get it. They don't understand why we do what we do. Part of it's because we sometimes need to be better storytellers about why we do what we do. But to your question about the newsletters, we don't have for my organization and most of the public libraries, we don't do separate newsletters that are related to sustainability. We try to integrate that into everything that gets done. So there's one library in the program in Suffolk County too, and Alex might have to help me remember who it is, but they actually coded their programs. They have a little icon they've created that ties what they do to sustainability. So if there's a program that particularly speaks well to the triple bottom line, that one is marked. And there's a little footnote at the bottom of the newsletter that makes the connection for people. We do this one because we're in this certification program and we've prioritized climate action work in our community. And the Library of Things that I showed you from the Curtis Memorial Library, Hazel, who has put that together, she's their sustainability leader at that ambassador at that library. She's mapped the Library of Things to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So she's using visual cues for people to help them make the connections between the offerings of the library and some of these other frameworks related to sustainability. So it's seen throughout the work in public libraries rather than creating a specialized segmented market for it, I guess is the way I describe it.
Rebecca, I believe it's Sachem Public Library, in their newsletter with next to each program, like you said, they have, the SLI logo. I believe it is Sachem. I don't know if Lindenhurst does it as well. They might, but Sachem definitely does it.
Cool. So I think it highlights the good work they're doing. It educates people at the same time. And they're starting, I think, to build the audience of folks that aligns with their values, and they're more drawn in to some of those programs. Carl, I see that. Sorry, Nardia.
Okay.
No, Nardia, go ahead.
Oh, I was to add to Edward's point, we do not have a newsletter. We send it out to our employee newsletter, and we educate, because we're mostly educational, how they can use different resources to help with specific topics that are going on or specific events that we're hosting. So there's a lot of educational resources that we put in our articles. And Carl had his.
Hey, thank you so much for this webinar. I'm just really on board with what y'all are doing for so many reasons. I just signed up on your website to get certified, but that may be a big step to take. And I'm concerned about the sort of impact on the three-legged stool around here of time and so forth. Are you willing to work with me to fit that into a busy schedule somehow?
Carl, just so you know, the certification program, there's no ticking clock on it. You can take your time and do it at the pace that works for you, the capacity that you have in your organization. And there's a lot of support. You get assigned a mentor. Nardia and I are both mentors in the program. So each person who signs up for the certification, or each institution that signs up for it, gets assigned a mentor who checks in with you. You get an orientation from Alex and Roger. And then the mentor helps you on a regular basis. You come to monthly meetups with everyone in the certification program to compare notes and get advice. But at the end of the day, you can work at the pace that's most comfortable for you. So absolutely.
And I will share, it took us 4 months to do step one. So it's all at your pace.
Well, I'll say that I went through it while it was being built. So while they were building the airplane, I was going through the certification program. So it took me multiple years to get through it. But it doesn't, at the end of the day, it didn't matter. It was really the experience of doing it. And it's not, it sounds so trite when I say it, but it truly is not a destination you're trying to get to. It is a journey you're on to help your organizational culture evolve. To really help people understand issues, the impacts of decisions we're making, to better understand the needs of the people that we serve, including our colleagues, and really just do better, find ways to do better. So if it takes longer, that's okay, as long as we're making improvements along the way.
You asked a brilliant question in the chat. Unfortunately, we have not found from our institution a good way of disposing of microfiche. That one's a very difficult one, especially when they start turning to vinegar. How do you recycle that? I do not have an answer. I'm sorry.
I can.
So we can toss out that question to the listserv of members to see if other people have done research on that or made any progress on it. I know I just had to put a question out about library cards themselves, and has anyone found a better version than the plastic ones we all rely on? And so it was just, tap it into the hive mind that's coming out of this community of practice. Sometimes the answer is, you're right, you can't find anything on this because no one's figured it out yet. And that might be the answer here too.
Rebecca?
Yeah, Roger.
I can answer the question about microfiche and microfilm.
Oh, look at that in action.
We did a coordinated order for all of our member libraries in Suffolk County because they all had the same problem. We contracted with Safety Clean, safety-KLEEN, and we bought barrels. You buy their 55-gallon drums that have lids and containers, and you fill them up with the microfiche and microfilm, and you pay by the pound, and then they go to their incinerator plants. I found them when I used to use chemicals in automotive repair, and they do the same process. So that's how we did it here in Suffolk County. And it took us probably 2 years for everybody to get rid of theirs. It was a process because the microfilm has to come off of the rolls. So we had to develop a tool to spin it off the rolls and then tape them so that they were neatly packed in and get as many as you can into one of these drums. But you can order, you can do something like that. And that information is on the SLI website as well.
It looks like Kelly, who asked the question, did find a place that will shred and incinerate it for free, as long as it sounds like you've got to travel to bring it there for them. Very cool. Kelly, you got a fan there, and Carl.
And I just want to point out that this is networking in action. It's sometimes as simple as this. We've already helped each other. So it looks like Kelly's question helped 2 other people, herself. And so I just want to say thank you all for coming here today, because this type of asking the question, you're all involved in the process already because you started having this conversation.
Yeah. So welcome to the fold. Thanks for having us. Edward, thanks for your persistence in getting us here today and being so welcoming. It's very nice to meet everyone, and we hope you'll stay in touch, whatever level's comfortable for you.
Thank you both. I really do appreciate it. This was a very positive and informative session, and I think that individually we can take a lot away from this, but I also think too that collectively, both within Pownley as well as in partnership with the SLI. I know Carl's he's already all in. I think more of us will hopefully join and contribute. So thank you.
Absolutely. Nice to see everyone. Have a great day.
You too.